Hey everybody, Ryan here at etrailer. Today we have a 2014 Thor Freedom Elite Motorhome, and we're going to be showing you how to install the Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar. But before we do that, why don't we check it out and make sure that it's something that'll work for you. So driving a motorhome, as many of you probably already know, is usually anything but a pleasant experience. The suspension is usually really loose, and when you have a vehicle of this size and you're going down the road, that's what you don't want. You know, you end up going down the road kind of getting tossed around. These things catch a lot of wind, and a lot of times you can feel like you're not in control. And honestly, who wants to deal with that when you're going on a long trip? Generally speaking, when you have your motorhome out, you know, you're going to be putting some miles on it. And so anything you do to make that experience better is well worth it, in my opinion. And so by upgrading your suspension components is really going to help make that experience much better. And what that's going to do is primarily stiffen everything up and eliminate a lot of that body roll. Now, if you're unsure what body roll is, I'm sure you felt it, but whenever you're going around a corner or making a kind of a wide turn, you know, you can feel that motorhome. It's so top heavy, kind of leaning as opposed to turning and being responsive how you want it. And so by upgrading the suspension, it's going to help eliminate that and make it more comfortable to drive and feel like you're in more control. So talking about it is one thing, but actually getting out on the road and driving is a completely different story. So before we put our parts on, let's go ahead, run through our test course and see how our motorhome does. That way we can kind of compare our before and after, you know, if the enhancement actually did make an improvement. So kind of get straightened out here, and we're going to go over some bumps and we'll see how this thing does. And pretty bad, I'm not going to lie, it's kind of expected that. Once the back of the motorhome goes over the bumps, you know, it's really kind of swaying side to side and getting tossed around. It's just kind of loose, you know, it's not responsive at all. When we hit this bump, you know, we can feel that sway back and forth, and it takes a while to kind of steady out and get going straight again, if that makes sense. So definitely room for improvement there, and so I think the suspension enhancement will definitely help. So at this point, we'll go ahead and run through our slalom course and do some evasive maneuvering. And I'm really curious to see how it's going to do here, because this is more of a real world driving experience. So I'll gain a little bit of speed and get turning. And when I make these sweeping turns, pretty bad, actually. Motorhome feels like it just wants to lean more than it does turn, and that can be a problem. That's a little unsettling, because if you do have to make an emergency maneuver like this, you want everything to be responsive and you want to be confident when you're making those maneuvers. So I feel like definitely room for improvement, and we'll see how our enhancement does the job. So now that we have our parts on, let's go ahead and run back through our test course and see if there's any improvements. So I'll go ahead and get going here. I'll straighten back out. And again, we're just going to run through our bumps first. And I like to get going kind of over one or two. That way we can really get the motorhome moving, get a good comparison. And definitely an improvement. The motorhome is a lot more responsive. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still, you know, a little bit of body roll and things like that. We're not in a race car, but you can definitely tell a difference. It's the roll that we get is a lot less. I'd say probably at least half of what we had before. And just the response time of it, you know, recovering is about the same. So if it were me, definitely something I'd look into, at least, you know, when going over these bumps and everything else. But Like I said a moment ago, you know, the slalom is kind of more of a real world situation, and that's what I'm really looking forward to do, to see if we have any improvements there as well. So now that we have an open area, we can do some more evasive maneuvering, and I'll start to pick up a little bit of speed, kind of get through this section here so I can make some more sweeping turns. And first cut, that was good. And much better, actually, way better. Way less body roll. Our motorhome felt like it was more planted and, you know, just much more responsive. When I was making those turns, you know, the motorhome was going that way. It didn't feel so top heavy, and when I pointed the wheels in a direction, it went there and solved that issue of kind of wandering around and being top heavy and loose. So definitely an improvement on that side as well. So this is what the sway bar looks like once it's installed on your motorhome. As you can see, everything fits nice, clears all of our components like it should, and so we know we can rely on it. We know it's going to do its job. That's pretty nice about this setup is the fact that this can work with motorhomes that have a factory sway bar already installed or ones that don't. Now chances are pretty good, at least with the majority of the motorhomes that I've seen, they're all going to have that factory sway bar. But if yours does not, they thought that through and included a U-bolt and a bracket to allow you to bolt this up and be able to enjoy the benefits as well. So the way the sway bar is going to work is pretty simple actually. This is more or less a big torsion spring. And so whenever you're making a wide turn or something like that and you're going to have that body roll, what it's going to do is push down on this side of the sway bar. And this is always going to kind of want to come back to that resting spring state. And so it's going to transfer that energy over and make it more responsive and help level that motorhome out. Now the reason this one has an advantage over the factory type one is threefold really. The design of it and the overall diameter. So this is going to be a more or less a stronger spring, if that makes sense. It's going to take more energy to not only force it down, but it's also going to be more responsive in transferring that energy. And then we have the benefit as well of having the polyurethane type bushings, not only on the brackets here, but also our end links. And the polyurethanes hold up a lot better than rubber bushings. You know, they're firmer, and when you apply the grease to them and everything else, they're less likely to squeak and wear out and deteriorate over time. If you are using this sway bar, you are going to be able to use it in conjunction with other suspension upgrades, and that's what a lot of our customers do. I personally recommend it as well. Generally speaking, the more the better, and you can really tighten everything up in your motorhome. And just one example of that is you can use the sway bar with these sumo springs. These are super simple how they work. They're going to go in between the bottom of your frame rail and the top of your axle. So they'll fill that void more or less. That way whenever you do make a wide turn or something like that, the sway bar is going to have to do even less work, and that's because these will bottom out and kind of give it some extra support and help keep everything a little more level. And that holds true for the front of your motorhome as well, and that's exactly what our customer did. They chose to replace that factory sway bar, again with the Roadmaster piece, and also used a steering stabilizer. And with all of these working together, your ride is going to improve so much. I've been in these motorhomes with nothing and everything, and it's night and day. So with that being said though, just something to look into. And you can find all these components right here at eTrailer. So I figured while we have our old sway bar off and getting ready to put our new one on, why not some side by side and just kind of compare the two. And I mean, right off the bat, I mean, you can notice how much thicker and beefier the new sway bar is compared to the factory one. And what that's going to do is just transfer that energy more, if that makes sense. So it's really going to help stiffen up the chassis, and even down to the little things, you know, the bushings that come included. They're polyurethanes, so they're going to hold up a lot better, transfer energy better. They're much larger in size. You can see they're a lot wider and thicker compared to the factory rubber type ones, which tend to wear out very fast. And even if we look at the end links, so the end link is going to connect to the sway bar and then go to the frame. And if I just hold that up next to the factory one, again, the new ones have a big advantage. The bushings are a lot better, much thicker in diameter, and just will do a better job overall. So at the end of the day, a suspension enhancement that you really can't go wrong with, you know. It actually makes quite a big difference and will make your life a little bit more comfortable whenever you're on them long road trips. Now, as far as the installation goes, it's really not terrible. For the most part, generally speaking, more or less a direct replacement. Probably the worst part about it is just having to get underneath the motorhome and work in kind of a tight spot. But good news is you only have to do it once and you're done. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and put it on together now. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the back of our motorhome, and we're going to be working right by our rear axle. Now, you don't need a lift to get this job done. You can do it on the ground. It's a little bit tight, of course, but for video purposes, and so you can get a really good look at what we're actually doing, we have our motorhome on a lift. That way it'll make it a little more clear for you guys. So here's our factory rear sway bar right here, and we're going to need to remove this. That way we can get the new one in place. So this is really simple. On each side, we're going to have some bushings, and we need to remove the hardware that's holding them in. So on each side of that bushing, there's going to be a 13mm head bolt. So we'll go ahead and get this side pulled out, as well as these. So when you have that hardware removed, you can pull down on the sway bar, and you can see it's going to move around. So what I'm going to do is just take one bolt and just kind of get a few threads started. That way the sway bar will hold itself up. That way when we undo the rest of the hardware, it's just not going to come crashing down on us. Now on each end of our sway bar, if we follow it towards the front, we're going to have this end link, and that's going to be connected to our frame. And we're going to have to remove that bolt on each side of our motorhome. So I'm going to do that using a 15mm socket. I already pulled the one out on the other side. And be careful when you're doing this. The sway bar might move or something like that, so just keep that in mind. So you want to support the sway bar and remove the bolts that we put back in hand tight. We should be able to lower it down and set it off to the side. Now what we can do is grab our new sway bar, and you're going to take the included split bushings. You're going to grab the cup of grease that they give you and really apply it to the inside of that bushing. That's going to help prevent squeaks and things like that. Then what I like to do, this part here, just kind of lightly put a coating on it as well. This is going to wrap around this portion of your sway bar, like so. We can take our bracket, push that on top, and then I simply just did the same exact thing for the other side as well. Grease the bushing, put it around there, and set our bracket on it. Now with an extra set of hands, we're going to raise our sway bar into position, and you're going to take that factory hardware, and we want to get them started. Get at least all of them going hand tight. That way the sway bar will kind of support itself while we're working on the rest of it. Now at this point, what we can do is attach our end link to the end of our sway bar here. Now you may have noticed that there's two kits available for your motorhome. One of them is designed to work with motorhomes that have the auto chains that come down behind your tires, and one of them is designed to work with the models that don't have that feature, if that makes sense. Both kits are identical with one exception. The only exception is the length of the end link. So the kit designed not to work with the chains has a longer one. Kit with the chains has a shorter one. So make sure you see our fit guide and get the appropriate one. With that said though, both kits are going to install exactly the same. and everything else. Just something I wanted to mention to make sure you get the right one. With that said, we can get our in-link ready. What you're going to do is take a bolt, flat washer, put it through. You're going to take another flat washer on this side, and then from the outside of the end of our sway bar here, just going to push that through the hole. You can take another flat washer, followed by a nylon lock nut, get it hand tight, and do the same thing on the other side. Now if you look on the inside of our frame rail, where our factory end-link bolted to, we're going to have this nut plate, and we're just going to pull that out. So you can kind of just maneuver it around, work it out. We'll set this off to the side. We're not going to be reusing it, and repeat this process on the other side of our motorhome as well. Now what we need to do to connect the other end of the end link, every motorhome is going to be a little bit different. You know, they're not all built exactly the same, but what we're trying to do is get the end link as straight as you can. All right, so in our case, if we did that, we'd have this bracket here in the way, and that would not allow us to mount it up like that. If that bracket isn't there, what you could do is refer to the measurements and the instructions, drill a small hole there, and use that as your attachment point. But since we have this bracket in the way, as opposed to compromising our frame by drilling an unnecessary hole that we necessarily don't have to have, we're just going to reuse the factory hole, which is that one right there. It'll set the end link straight enough, and it'll work like it should. That being said, we're going to use the same hardware combination that we used on the bottom. Just a bolt with the flat washer. You will put another flat washer on the other side. And we can simply just line it up with the factory hole and push it in place. So on the inside of the frame, here's where our bolt came through. We're going to put on a flat washer and a nylon lock nut, put that hand tight, and do this over on the other side as well. So now that we have everything loosely installed, you want to come back and tighten down these bolts here that hold up our brackets, holding the sway bar up to the rear axle. Once they're tight, you want to grab a torque wrench and tighten them down to the amount specified in the instructions. Then you can come back to your end link attachment points, snug them down, and then again tighten them down to the amount specified in our instructions. Now at this point, it's never a bad idea just to hop in the motorhome, you know, take it for a spin, just to make sure everything sounds and feels good. And once you verify that, you're ready to hit the road and enjoy your trip to your next destination. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar on our 2014 Thor Freedom Elite Motorhome.